You heard from Karen the national perspective. So this next panel is again about the national perspective, the regional perspective, and the statewide perspective of people that we know, boots on the ground doing this. And again, you see Pat McCarty, the chair of our advisory board here. Lise, thank you for coming all the way across the country for Corporation for a Skilled Workforce. They've been a partner with the Center of Excellence since 2008, I think. And our own Carrie Pierce gets to be Barbara today. I'm excited. Barbara Bird is sick and not able to make it, so she's stepping in to represent organized labor. And Steve, thanks for coming. So you have the moderator extraordinaire. Jim Crabb is the Director of Workforce for the State of Washington, the Community College System. He took me under his wing 8 years ago, fresh out of industry, and I'm pretty sure I drove him crazy for a couple of years at least, right? Okay, but what he instilled in me and in the 10 centers of excellence is the model that we're creating in Washington State to become a national model, and I was thrilled to hear from Karen. We know that news is getting to DC. We've all made multiple trips. I can attest to that. So back there talking to our legislators, talking to our national organizations based in DC. So Jim is our guru for the Centers of Excellence, and actually, I call him the godfather for the Centers of Excellence. So he is going to tell you a little bit about what the state's doing and tease out some great information from our panelists. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, I think I'm wired for sound here. Be careful about that talk about being a godfather with, as you know, Tony Soprano just passed away, so I hope we don't have a heart attack here, right? But thanks, Barb, for that introduction. I'm Jim Crabb, the Director of Workforce Education at the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. And indeed, this is about the 9th year of our Centers of Excellence movement. A long time ago, when looking at workforce development in the state, we realized that we had to do a better job of connecting with business and industry. And I think Karen, our previous speaker from Aspen Institute, did a fantastic job of talking about the difficulty in workforce and economic development and the fact that communication between business and education is key if we're going to close the skills gap and educate those future workers that we need. Jim Walton also did a great job of talking about the challenges we face. The baby boomers who are leaving, some of those baby boomers who leave and come back. I can talk to that to some of you who are looking at retirement. And also those new workers that are hoping to get into the workforce where you have 3 people applying for every opening and not having the skills that they need, that the industry wants, so that they're a good fit for that company. All of those challenges are real, and our Centers of Excellence is our opportunity, and it's really our strategy here in the state to do that connection. And now we're finding too, in work with our centers, that there's lots of crossovers. And that's why this particular forum is so great, because we have construction, we have energy, we had marine, and we had global transportation, trade, and logistics all represented here at the forum because of those crossover skills. We've also got to educate those people in the workforce who are going to be moving up. So we have an incumbent worker challenge, a new worker challenge, and also keeping up with cutting edge parts of the industry. So we have a great panel of very diverse folks from different backgrounds. And what I'm going to do is have each of them introduce themselves and the organization or company that they are with, and talk a little bit about how they interact with the workforce development system, what are the challenges they see, or if they don't see challenges, how have they overcome those challenges so that they feel comfortable going forward into this new competitive, more competitive and global economy. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel, and then I'll have each of them give some remarks. First, we have Pat McCarty, Generation Manager of Tacoma Power. We have Steve Gelb, Director of Emerald Cities in Seattle. Lisa Roseman, Vice President for Research and Development for the Corporation for a Skilled Workforce. And Carrie Pierce from the State Labor Council here in Washington State, who is sitting in for Barbara Bird, who couldn't make it this morning from Oregon. So with that, we'll turn it over first to Pat for a couple of his remarks.
Thanks, Jim. Tacoma Power is a traditional vertically integrated utility. So we have generation, transmission, and distribution all in one. We've got about 800 employees, and I'm responsible for about a fourth of that. And the employees within the generation group, I also have our facilities folks. So we've got from custodians to plant electricians out at the hydros to in our production engineering group, the really specialized electrical engineers for control systems. And there's quite a broad swath of both opportunities and challenges in filling those positions. Since we're a utility, I think we're better positioned than some manufacturing or even construction, where you're trying to attract people at a wage that might be working a working level wage, but it's not very attractive. So when we post jobs at a wage that's competitive with other utilities, we usually get a lot of applicants. Now, it depends on a couple of things, the quality of those applicants. One of them is location. We have some significant challenges attracting folks to places like Wynoochee, which is down the road a little bit further and up in the hills about an hour and a half. Those positions, they're highly technical in nature, and yet you really need to be an avid hunter, fisherman, like loneliness in order to hang out there. And then we have the folks that we hire in town. And one of the challenges we're having with our craft workers in town is finding folks who can, as Karen put it, kind of match the overall community in form of diversity. You know, we're able to get quite a few white male linemen that are fairly well qualified that want to come to work for Tacoma. But in order to try and match that diversity within the community, one of the things that we've had to do is develop a pre-apprenticeship trainee program where we do some hand selection of folks, bring them in, give them an on-the-job experience of about 6 months, and then weed that group down to enter into the apprenticeship program. One of our largest challenge areas right now is with engineers, and especially engineers with any experience. It seems like the system is putting out quite a few civil, mechanical, and electrical engineers, and some of those are having challenges actually finding the jobs that they need. But the ones with 5 or 7 years of experience in the power industry are a rare commodity. I'm going to shift gears for just a minute and talk about at the national level. I'm also I'm a vice chair of a hydraulic power committee for the National Hydropower Association. And NHA has just started to put together a workforce development task force to look at some of the challenges that are across all of the hydro utilities out there with this, as Karen put it, the silver tsunami coming. So we've had a false start on the silver tsunami because it was projected back before the Great Recession that all these people were going to be leaving their jobs and retiring. Well, since the recession hit, I think it's put a time delay on that, and we're just starting now to see those retirements coming in place. But one of the challenges at the national level is one of the vision for NHA is to double the hydropower capacity in the United States by 2025. And they plan on doing that by by powering existing dams. Only 3% of the dams in the United States actually have power on them. So there's a lot of opportunities out there to add powerhouses to like Army Corps or Bureau of Reclamation dams that were originally designed for either water supply, flood control, irrigation type things. Well, if their vision is to if they're to meet that vision, they're going to need about 700,000 workers in the hydro industry alone in order to construct and operate those facilities. And so they're looking at trying to fill that pipeline just in time for when those jobs are due. I think I've taken more than enough time, so why don't we pass it on down to Lise?
Lisa, would you like to?
Thank you. So I'm Lise Rossman with Corporation for a Skilled Workforce, and a little bit about CSW and why I'm sitting up here. So CSW is a 22-year-old national nonprofit organization based out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I actually work with them out of my home in St. Louis, Missouri, so that's where I've come from today. And we work with a lot of different partners around the country over that 22 years to reimagine everything about work and learning. So we've done that with community colleges, workforce investment boards, industry, labor, foundations, employees themselves, community-based organizations, just about everybody who touches this issue we have in some way interacted with in all 50 states across the country. And really we do that to provoke transformative change and policy shifts that connect workers to better education and jobs, that create more competitive companies, and that create more sustainable communities. So my role at CSW, I'm our Vice President of Research and Development, and that means I have responsibility for our research and learning portfolio, which basically means trying to glean from our work and what we're learning in that, how to really move the needle and shift things on the ground, and how to pursue new opportunities to learn more about promising practices that are going on, to understand better the challenges that are facing workers and communities and employers, and then try to bring our knowledge back into the field. So that's a relatively, I've been doing that for 2 years now at CSW. Prior to that, I spent 8 years looking at how to connect vulnerable populations to education and training and family-sustaining careers. So I kind of come at this question about workforce and what does this all look like and what are the key challenges a little bit from that angle, but certainly more broadly from CSW's experience. So based on the work that we're doing in 50 states, I do want to say, I'll talk about some key issues and a few sort of solutions or overarching frameworks, but it was fun to get invited to come here because your region and the work that these centers of excellence are doing are very frequently cited in what we talk about when we go and visit with people and tell them about promising practices. So it's kind of fun to get to a little bit preach to the choir about how to do this the right way and how to really make a difference, because we point to what you're doing in a lot of cases as what folks need to look at and really try to move forward. So a couple of key issues that I wanted to just sort of frame that we're seeing at the national level and that really come down into all of the work that we do. I guess the big picture that we're seeing is this idea that perpetual volatility is the new normal. And I don't think it was that way even when I started this work about 10 years ago. I don't think that was quite the situation. I feel like there was some stability and people kind of understood the long-term picture and could kind of prepare in that way or at least ignore what was going to happen and keep doing something. The idea that in the last, I would say 5 to 7 years, things have become much more volatile, and doesn't seem to just be a passing phase, that we're just in sort of upheaval and then we'll get back to life as we knew it. So what we're looking at as we talk with building the capacity of people on the ground to do this work better and to be more responsive to these conditions, we're really looking at how you ingrain in people into their biorhythm this idea of rapid responsiveness and constant iteration. How do you deal with key issues that are going to keep coming up, volatile issues that are going to keep presenting themselves, and not sort of treat those as a point in time, but really treat that, dealing with that as the way that you do business. How do you build infrastructure and relationships to do that over and over and over again? And the folks we've seen as being successful have really tried to figure out how to ingrain that and how they set themselves up, how they work together, what they focus on. A couple of the issues that, in terms of workforce, that we are particularly concerned about, and there are a lot of them and several more that we probably can't even see coming at this point. This morning we've heard a lot about pending retirements and this issue. And to me, that's where this idea of the skills gap really comes in. there is, as Karen mentioned this morning, some debate about whether there's sort of a skills gap at various levels within the workforce. I'm fully convinced there will be a skills gap when the kind of retirements that we're foreshadowing are going to come. We are going to have a massive dropout of skills from our labor force when those folks retire. So that is of very critical concern because those skills are going to take a while to get back. And so what we can do now to try to build that is going to be critically important. There's also a shift in industry policy to support workers. We saw some momentum on what industry is doing to create better careers and career pathways for workers, to bring more diversity and equity into the workforce, to be more supportive of retention, to do more on-the-job training. And with the Great Recession, as it was referenced, some of those efforts really receded. There wasn't as much focus on sort of how you advance what you've got because there was a pretty plentiful labor market and there wasn't as much pressure to try to hold on to people, to try to attract people. It was a different labor market. So I think as things start to recover, hopefully, we'll see a little bit more attention being paid to what industry and employers can do in that. The other couple that I'll mention are new technology. We've heard about that a lot this morning already, and just the idea that there are new technologies we don't even know are coming, and how we're able to be responsive to that and training new workers for those technologies and training workers to be the inventors of those technologies, sort of different than the way we've maybe done things recently. And then I also want to just highlight, because of my background, this idea of, which Pat mentioned, was of diversity and equity, and how do you build that into your workforce planning? How do you make sure that your workforce represents the community and your customers and clients, and the role that a lot of different organizations can play in making that a reality? So we want to look at that pretty holistically and where we can fit that in. It's important to what CSW does and what we talk with people about. So in terms of what to do about any of that, it's a challenge on any given day, as I'm sure you all know. And the biggest thing we're emphasizing at this point with people is this idea that helping to be a navigator through very tumultuous waters is a critical role for our workforce system. That there isn't going to be a simple solution and a quick program that's going to solve these very multidimensional, complex issues, but helping create the structures and systems in place to be able to be continually responsive and serve as that navigator, that guide, that trusted partner is really where we're trying to build capacity. So there are a couple roles that we see as critical in that. One is the role of being having a long-term view of relationship building. So this idea that working with employers, working with colleges, working with community-based organizations, those things can't just be transactional anymore. That'll get you through the crisis of the day, and then you'll have to rebuild that all when the next crisis comes. So we are really encouraging people to have a long-term view of those relationships and how you build that out. And building the baseline for some of that constructive collaboration. You heard Karen talk about some of what they're learning about how partnerships are doing that when she spoke this morning. The other role is to really be a broker and a translator across all of the various partners that have to come together to make these complex responses possible. And I feel like Karen said everything I was going to say. So Karen mentioned the idea of language being important and needing to navigate a lot of complex issues and relationships and keep that all moving, and really to be in a place where you're able to deal with that volatility. You've got to be able to have a few people who are willing to be those trusted partners and those brokers, those translators that can play the role of bringing together interests from industry and industry and community colleges and organizations and workers that are all trying to kind of make this work, not to mention trying to bring a policy lens to that too. So how you're interpreting all this information and making shifts is an important role. The two other things I wanted to mention. One is just around kind of how we're thinking about frameworks for workforce development and how this plays out. And I'm going to borrow from the Center for Energy Workforce Development because I think that they have a pretty good framework that they've suggested for looking at this. And they highlighted 4 roles in a recent report that they put out that we like. The first is dealing with career awareness and a focus on that within your workforce development activities. And that's the idea that with these pending retirements, with shifts in the labor market, with shifts in new technology, our labor market just doesn't know about these jobs, about what they look like, about what they mean, what they need to be able to do them. So there's a real role to play in bringing up the knowledge about what's available in this industry. The second is around education. So to me, this is three-part. One is work readiness, which I don't think we've always considered part of education. But more and more and more, we're hearing this idea that we've got plenty of workers that apply for things, but the work readiness, their ability to be there and think about systems when they're at work and have good customer service skills, those pieces are not coming through as clearly as some of the technical skills. So thinking about how to incorporate that within our education activities is pretty critical in terms of what we're hearing from industry. The second piece is helping industry and colleges and employees get clearer about competencies. So with the skills gaps that are going to be coming or are already in place, a lot of it, those gaps are perceived, we believe, because of a lack of knowledge about what the actual skills are that people need and need to be successful on a job on all accounts. So workers don't really understand what skills they have and how to apply that in a new job or when they're talking to an employer. Employers have some sense of a job description, but very rarely dig down into that competency level about what specifically someone needs. And then educators are out trying to train for both of those confused parties and trying to figure out how to bring that together. So getting clearer about competencies and building the market for those we think is really critical. The other one is I think Karen mentioned too this morning, building skills that translate across industries. Given volatility, it's realistic that people are going to have lots of jobs in their careers. So how do you look within industries or clusters for those opportunities to train people so that they can move within those labor markets pretty naturally? The two other roles, just in terms of workforce and their contribution to this, would be workforce planning, helping employers understand their workforce needs. I've done a lot of work in healthcare and also manufacturing, and especially healthcare always surprises me how little those employers know about what they actually need. They don't have a good sense all the time of kind of where things are going, and I think the same thing applies in lots of industries. And there's a key role for workforce to play in bringing some literacy and awareness about that. The last one is structure and support. So again, being a trusted partner, having good relationships in place so that you can be responsive to the needs of industry. So I was going to talk about entrepreneurship for a little bit, but I'm going to save that in case it comes up as a question. And I think just to summarize, again, we're looking at how people can be in collaborative, constructive action together, how they can help weather things that we don't even know are coming. And some of the partnerships that you'll hear more about today and heard about yesterday, I think are really critical to that and are a good example, as I said, of when we point to how people are doing this right and trying to be really responsive. We always look up here to the Northwest for that, and I'm excited to learn more the rest of the day, too. Thanks.
So my name is Carrie Pierce. I work for the Washington State Labor Council. I've worked for the Washington State Labor Council for almost 24 years. Now, normally when I say that in a group, there's a collective gasp, but when I say it in the energy field, they're like, yeah, you're only halfway there. Like, of course. So I'm currently the K-12 Apprenticeship Director and the Community and Technical College Labor Liaison. So Barbara was supposed to talk to you about workforce development on the national level, was my understanding, but I don't have as large of a focus as she does, so I'm going to talk a little bit on the national level and then bring it down to the state level where I work. So some of you have seen the bumper sticker, the labor movement, the folks who brought you the weekend. In the past, labor has fought for those 8-hour workdays, weekends, health and safety regulations, safety standards, child labor laws. But currently, we're working to save the middle class and to have family wage jobs. And the way that we've figured out how to do that is to work within our workforce development system. Whether that's on our local WDCs, I know there's several of us labor members that are sitting in this audience that also serve on our local WDCs, at the state level, at the Workforce Board, and then in national workforce forums. So organized labor provides the workforce that we're all talking about here. And we have the goals of good paying family wage jobs. We want to make sure that workers come back safe and sound the same way they left for work, they return home in that same condition. And we want to continue to provide training to keep up on the employer's standards and needs so they stay relevant. So as the two panelists before us talked about the worker shortage in the next 20 years and how, and we're committed to providing that best workforce to fill those jobs, and the recession kind of slowed all that down. So as part of that sort of massive worker exit that was predicted that didn't quite happen right away, we here in Washington, collectively within labor, started to look at the K-12 system and thought, well, okay, if we're going to start to develop a workforce, we need those kids that are in that system to better understand what jobs are available here in energy and in construction. So we do that a couple of ways. Just yesterday we were talking about working with the Girl Scouts in the Spokane area and how we created a workshop for them to be able to do some grid simulation. And here's these middle school girls that collectively brought down a grid and brought it back up again. And we did that in a community that probably, I don't know, did they earn a badge for that? I think they did as well, or created one. But it's a group of people that hadn't really been tapped into before. Right? So we also worked with the Careers in Energy Week. We did several activities. I'm going to just highlight 2 or 3 of my favorites, although you're supposed to not have favorites like children. But one of them was at Avista Power Company. They have this wonderful line school. And we were able to invite high school counselors in the Spokane area, school district area, to come to the line school to learn about apprenticeship, just not only in general, but then also within the energy industry. And then they were given the opportunity to be apprentices for an hour and a half. So they got to go out. It was a little windy, so they couldn't do any pole climbing, but they came back with a better understanding of what apprenticeship is, which is hands-on learning. And then on the reverse spectrum is that at the end of that week, Tacoma Power has a fish hatchery, and so we were going to give them, counselors, the opportunity to be able to learn about all jobs in energy, and fish hatchery included one of them. And we picked a day that was like their in-service day, so no one was available. No one was going to be making it. About 3 days before the event was supposed to take off, I got a call from the counselor and said, I have a very small group of kids, like 5 kids. If they just drove up to the fish hatchery themselves, would you be willing to still do this presentation? So I called Tacoma Power, and Randy Stern said, of course we would. So then I got a call from another counselor and said, well, I can't make it, but can my son make it? And I thought, okay, well, maybe he's in high school, some other school. Ends up he was a college graduate in IT. Clearly she wanted him off the couch. So a teacher on his day off with 5 seniors on their day off went up to the fish hatchery along with the IT graduate and learned about what jobs were available at the fish hatchery. So although I jokingly said it was floundering at the fish hatchery, it actually was one of my favorite events. So back to how important wages and benefits are. Again, yesterday we were talking about the customer service representatives in a smaller group conversation in terms of a grant application within the energy industry. And those of you in the energy industry understand that when we say customer service reps in the energy, those are very well-paying jobs. But they can also be, outside of the energy industry, just your standard call-in help center, okay? Well, this job announcement that we talked about in customer service, the wage topped out at $25 an hour. So although this announcement may not be the norm, I hope it is, but it does provide an example of what the company expects of a quality employee. And then when we look at that workforce development, it's important to also consider those wages and benefits as the driver for these good jobs. So I'm willing to bet this employer is going to have no problem filling the position, and they're going to have probably hundreds of what they think qualified employers or potential employees to choose from. So I work with two individuals, Bill Messenger and Caitlin Felling, or Jekyll now, she got married over the summer, who work specifically with dislocated workers. And they deal with folks that have lost their jobs and are helping them, like the entire employment population, explore education, training, and employment options. So this past year, they were working with a number of workers who lost their customer service jobs because of foreign competition. In March, Caitlin attended the Center of Excellence for Clean Energy Industry panel on my behalf. I was out of town visiting my daughter in Cairo. So as part of that panel discussion, Alan Hardcastle gave a presentation for the customer service skill standards that he and Sally had worked on, and the results and the recommendations for the needs of the energy industry. As Caitlin was listening to this presentation, she realized she has been working with an entire industry that was just a few more training or educational, as my friend Bob Topping calls stackable credentials. These workers would have a great opportunity within the energy industry. And in the best practice scenario, the previously mentioned employer would have hundreds more applicants to choose from.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Gelb. I'm the local director for Emerald Cities in Seattle. Emerald Cities is a national network of 10 cities around the country, even though we like to say Seattle was the original Emerald City. But we're 10 cities around the country focused on the triple bottom line, which is the environment, the economy, and equity. So we're looking at linking those together. And it grew up early in the Obama administration in collaboration between the building trades, environmental groups, housing advocates, and others who saw the opportunity to link all of these issues together for the benefit of workers and our communities, particularly in cities where so much energy is used, so many people live, and so much employment was needed. We are a collaborative organization, so we are a collaborative of labor, business, government, and community groups. And we're what someone talked about earlier as sort of an intermediary organization, trying to bring these groups together and coordinate the issues that are of concern to them to move the energy industry forward, particularly the energy efficiency segment of it. And what we focus on is developing projects and programs around energy efficiency that create the environmental benefits, but also create the quality jobs related to it. And our goal is to bring this clean energy economy, the energy efficiency part of it, to scale. And I think early on in Emerald City's history, and if you all, I'm sure, remember 3-4 years ago, we thought this energy efficiency industry was absolutely going to go crazy. And we thought the role of Emerald Cities primarily was going to be to make sure that all of these jobs being created were good jobs. And we did that through community workforce agreements, which assured opportunities for apprentices and opportunities for underserved communities, through high road agreements and methods like that. But what we realized was that although this industry was growing, it wasn't quite growing as fast as we had hoped, as it needed to for other critical issues such as climate change and employment and so on. So we were going to be a part of project development or of creating demand at the same time. So we help create demand and then make sure once we have demand for efficiency and jobs, that those jobs are good jobs. So in terms of the workforce development system, our primary need is in construction, and it's for apprentices and folks ready for apprenticeship. Since a part of our focus is on underserved communities, we want to be sure that we increase the representation of women, people of color in the construction workforce, and bring those from low-income backgrounds and formerly incarcerated into that workforce and provide those opportunities. And I think some of the challenges right now are the ability or the challenge of coordinating that the supply and demand of that. It's an emerging sector. I don't believe we're at the scale, I know we're not at the scale we would hope to be at, And often we're not at a scale that makes it easy for the workforce development sector to align with. But I think there's still a huge need out there for improving our cities, for energy efficiency, for reducing carbon and all of those things. And there's some policies enacted that are going to get us there. In Seattle, we just passed a climate action plan this week, which calls for being a net zero carbon emitter by 2050. And that will require essentially retrofitting every building in the city, or making sure every building in the city reaches energy efficiency standards, and has a promise to create thousands of jobs, economic development, and so on. And I think we understand much better now what that will take. And I think the plan is a realistic plan. And our challenge is how do we scale it up, and how do we communicate with the workforce development system to make sure that as we scale it up, the workforce is there. It's not there too early, it's not there too late. So I think it's opening those lines of communications that will be really important. Another thing I just wanted to touch on was a national program we're working on in various cities, is to work with community colleges in particular to be sort of role models and leaders in energy efficiency, and making their buildings and campuses more efficient, which saves money, creates better study environments, work environments, connecting that to curriculum, so students in general understand what's happening on their campus, understand sustainability, and then also connect that with job opportunities for students. So we see community colleges as sort of the perfect partners to bring that triple bottom line together, as your mission is the community and the future, and we believe this is part of the future. So we have very active programs down in the Bay Area and Peralta Community Colleges, San Francisco Community College, and also in Cleveland. And we're looking to develop similar relationships here in Washington. So the last thing I think I'll touch on is another project we're doing is with multifamily housing, and we're finding a significant need for experts who understand the operations of buildings. That many of the recommendations are not to retrofit a building or for expensive repairs or renovations, but to simply operate the building much better. And also, as we put new technologies into buildings, that operating those buildings better is going to be the challenge. And I think the building owners will need to figure out over time exactly how do I get those skills into my staff, whether it's maintenance staff or it's going to be resource conservation managers or building operators. Particular challenge with smaller buildings. I think large buildings and campuses are headed there already, but small buildings are not, and yet they have the same kind of needs. So there's going to be a huge need for folks with building science expertise, and I believe those positions will evolve, and it will just be a matter of defining exactly what they look like and who's going to hire them. So I'll leave it at that for questions.
Okay, well, I'm going to circle back on some of the themes that I've heard here. And the first one I'd like to kind of focus in on is the skills gap. And it was interesting, we just conducted 10 regional forums around the state to talk to each of the industry sectors that our centers of excellence represent. We have 10 of those centers that are lined up with the sectors in our state's economy that we think really drives our economy and has the bulk of the jobs. And we did those with the Association of Washington Business and with our center directors. And the questions we were asking is about what are these folks that we're looking for that we can't find? You can't pick up a newspaper or a magazine anymore that talks about workforce development that doesn't talk about the fact that employers have lots of jobs that have been announced, but they're having difficulty finding people with exactly those skills. When we went around and talked in those industry forums, what we heard more about than actual skills attendant to a sector were the employability skills that I know, Lisa, you talked a little bit about. So do you think that the skills gap is driven by a need for more people with employability skills because we repeatedly hear from industry, we can train them on the technical stuff. What we can't train them on are those employability skills, working as a member of a team, being able to solve problems, and so forth and so on. Another spin that you'll hear when people talk about skills gap is that there really isn't a skills gap, that it has to do with our economy and the fact that businesses are a little bit reluctant right now to invest, and ergo, the jobs just kind of churn. There are people leaving jobs and coming back into jobs. It's just a matter of a conversation that lines up those dislocated workers or unemployed workers with the right jobs at the right place. What's your take on the skills gap? What do you think it really is? Any of you?
Well, the skills gap is complicated, as you highlight, and CSW for a long time, when I came into CSW, the skills gap was beaten into my head as the reason that we existed and the reason that everyone in the workforce system existed, was this idea that workers can't find people, people are out there, there's a gap, we got to figure out what to do. And I think these economic conditions have made it much harder to understand what's at the heart of that skills gap, and have made it even more difficult to then figure out what to do about it. So that's not to just be vague, that's to admit that I don't think there is a really good answer about this. And I think it differs greatly by industry and by region even. So one of the things we're doing in Detroit, we do quite a bit, our home office is in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is sort of south central Michigan, and we do a lot of work in southeast Michigan and Detroit. And there was this whole idea that like there must be a massive skills gap, and that's why people are unemployed in droves. And the more we've dug into that, that's true for some people. There are absolutely issues around basic skills, the ability to read, write, do math. Those skills, that's totally a real issue. And this issue of employability skills is almost more profound in some of those settings. So a lot of the work we've been doing with this, the Detroit Jobs Alliance that we're building, is around helping people understand what those foundational skills even are, so that we can actually do something about them. And I think that's where employers are sort of buying into that and saying, yeah, you're right, it's not the skills that we need for people to be able to put things together in the plant or to assist with manufacturing or to be in retail settings. It really is about these employability skills that this whole population apparently seems to have completely lost. So we're doing a lot of work right now with employers to help articulate very specifically what those skills are, because it's very easy for an employer to say, I just need somebody who knows how to work, and then I'll tell them what to do when they get here. But that's not good enough. One of the things we just put on was a panel with several retail employers in Detroit, and it was really interesting to just hear how they've gotten used to this vague language about like, I don't know, they just don't have good customer service skills. And then you're sort of like, well, what do you mean? Do you mean they don't have empathy? Do you mean that they aren't using good listening skills? Do you mean that they don't understand how to solve problems? Do you mean that they don't understand how to use the technology necessary to deliver whatever good and service you're talking about? And when you try to dig in on that, it becomes really difficult, because they say, I don't know, my hiring manager just said people don't have good work skills. And then you start digging further and further and further and get to this. So I think there are particular skills that there are gaps around, but I don't entirely believe that we're at a huge disadvantage in terms of technical skills and that people don't have the right capacity. I think that this is a mitigatable challenge. We just have to understand it better.
Yeah, I just want to follow on. You need Alan Hardcastle, because Alan has put together numerous skill standards, and there's one for customer service that I'm sure Barbara's got the link to, that goes down each one of those skill gaps and identifies what they are and what you need to do to be a good customer service rep or plant electrician or mechanic or operator, a whole host of them. I was just thinking about one, this past Monday I raised with managers who work for me and the plant managers, and said, what are our biggest challenges right now? And two positions came up, and they're plant mechanics and plant engineers. We get a lot of applications. But one of the trends that's happened in the Pacific Northwest after the spotted owl came in and took over the forests is the number of mills in the area has dropped significantly. And we're a fairly small shop, so I've only got like, I don't know, 10, 12 electricians and mechanics spread about 7 different powerhouses. So we don't have an apprenticeship program for them. So we've been hiring primarily these folks that have come out of mills. It's great if we can time a hiring with a mill closure. We get good number of applicants, but that hasn't happened for a while. So the number of both mechanics and electricians who have this troubleshooting capability is lacking. You don't get that in the construction industry. You only get it in the manufacturing or mill setting. So those are probably the biggest gaps that we've got going forward right now.
I would just say in energy efficiency that a lot of folks feel we need I think the assumption was we need energy efficiency workers. And I think what I've seen in all sectors is we need construction workers. We need traditional electricians, plumbers, sheet metal workers, and so on. And they just need enhanced skills. And for the most part, I think the JTCs and the apprenticeship programs have implemented those over the years, and that is part of their training today. So I haven't seen we have a big skills gap. We have a demand gap. We don't have enough demand right now. So that's something we're working on. I think if there's a skills gap, it's in our effort to make sure women have opportunities, people of color have opportunities, and so on, is making sure those segments of the population have the skills and that we have enough of them to improve their representation in the workforce. So.
Well, and if I could also add to that. So during this industry forums that Barbara and Shana from construction had to prepare for, Barbara had asked me to pull the apprenticeship numbers for the energy industry in terms of power generation and all of those sort of outdoor industry job titles. And in general, what came to pass was that there was not a decline. It's like the industry stayed relatively flat, the same before the recession, during, and as we're starting to slowly grow out of it. In construction, those numbers went way down in apprenticeship, and the reason being was because there wasn't work, right? I mean, apprenticeship is the one sort of employment opportunity or training opportunity that's actually attached to employment. So they have to be very honest about how many apprentices they can bring in and to develop. It doesn't do anybody any good to develop 60 laborers or IBW workers when there's no employment for them at the other end of that apprenticeship. So I don't know that it's such a skills gap in terms of the labor community, as again, it's the demand. I mean, when we have work available, we're going to go to work, and they're going to be good paying family wage jobs.
Okay, so it's a very interesting topic, and you'll find some who will say, you know, there really isn't a skills gap, it's a communications problem. We have an aerospace pipeline committee that was set up by the legislature here this last session to really hone in on aerospace. As we all know, it's a huge industry sector in our state and a driver. Many of the jobs in our economy are linked to aerospace and the suppliers for aerospace. And what we found in that work was that a lot of the job announcements used titles that our colleges didn't really know what they were about. And our college programming, when we say we're graduating airframe and power plant mechanics or machinists, what's the difference between that and a tool machinist or a tooling machinist? And so the subtleties and the lack of communication found that we were talking past each other. How's the best way for colleges and the education system to engage employers to get clarity on what's really being asked for and what's really needed? What's been your experience around the best ways to connect? Another issue around that is we found that sometimes our colleges said, well, it's best to connect with the HR director. Others said, no, it's better to talk to the operations manager. And others said, no, it's more important to talk to the CEOs because they have the strategic vision for the future. How do you best connect with industry in such a way that we can gain clarity around what the supply side of the equation is producing and what the demand side of the equation really needs?
Well, quickly, I would say that they need to engage their centers of excellence in the state of Washington. And I'm serious, I'm not just kissing up. I was in a meeting at OSPI, and they were engaged with ESD and the Workforce Board and how we're going to get kids more engaged in graduation and how do we get industry involved. And it was the centers of, you have centers of excellence that are engaged with industry and labor. And if you're not engaged with labor, come and talk to me, and I'll get you hooked up. But they're the boots on the ground. Okay, I'm done kissing up.
So, yeah, you have really tough questions. One of the things, we just finished some research at CSW. It's like just in the editing stages right now, and hopefully this paper will be coming out anytime. We did about a 2-year research project on business engagement and credential validation, which sort of gets to what you're talking about. It's this idea of giving employers and educational partners in frameworks for the kinds of discussions that get to that level of detail. And what we found in that research was that employers were often in conversation with colleges, and colleges felt like they were often in conversation with employers. And so this issue should have come up at some point. It would have made sense. They felt like they had good partnerships in place, and they were checking in, and the employers had weighed in and said, yeah, that looks great, whatever. But then there wasn't a sort of deeper framework for a conversation about, okay, what skills are contained within those occupations, what skills are contained within the training that we're providing, and let's get really specific about the tasks and the knowledge, skills, and abilities, basically, that are within those occupations. In most cases, the employers hadn't even really thought it out at that level. You had maybe an HR manager that was creating a job description based on what an operations manager or someone on the plant floor had told them. But then when they came back and sort of translated that to the job description, it was sort of in their company speak and not necessarily in terms that education could use or that a worker could use to look at that and go, okay, I know what I did in my program. Here's how what I did relates to what you're talking about. Or here's what I did in a past job relates to what you're talking about. So one of the things we looked at were 5 to 7 different frameworks for this, which basically are different processes that you go through to have those conversations with employers and get really specific. And I would add, in addition to talking with CEOs, which I do think is important, and we saw that that made a difference in terms of longer term projections of the kinds of skill sets that were needed, not just the specific occupations, and talking to HR managers because they kind of know numbers, and ops managers because they have a different angle on sort of what this means in the big picture. The place we really focused was on the technicians themselves that have either been doing similar jobs or are doing jobs in a cohort with the new occupations that are coming on board, because they get on a daily basis, what do you have to do to be successful in this job? So bringing your all-star technician, whoever has been in that position before, into that process is sort of at the core of several of those frameworks. And I don't think that's the level at which those discussions happen very often. You get employer advisory boards and they come to the college and they talk very generally about what's up, but it's not very often that you pull someone off the line or pull someone out of the plant to actually have that conversation. And so the more we can bring those frameworks present or forward and bring other people into those discussions and get their input, I think it'll create the HR manager may not know it, but it's going to create better workers ultimately when they hit the floor.
I'll speak to a related thing that I think we discovered particularly in residential energy efficiency that was interesting, was that the jobs they were doing, the workers do in residential efficiency Sometimes they're dirty jobs, crawling around attics and crawl spaces and so on. And one of the key attributes folks needed to have is they needed to care, for the most part, about the industry they were in. And efficiency and knowing we were doing something about sustainability was a motivating factor for them. And to retain workers, I think a lot of organizations found that they not only needed people with skills, they needed people who were aligned with the mission of the organization, the company, or the nonprofit, whatever it was. So I think that's an interesting spin. And I would go further and to say that when we're trying to recruit folks into training programs or jobs, that we can say we're looking for plumbers and electricians and apprentices, and to a lot of folks that sounds like old trade careers. But we're really looking for energy efficiency workers and on-the-job training programs. And if we start using language that is more like that, I think we'll attract the right folks and have an easier time attracting folks.
You just have to make sure they're not afraid of spiders, too. Well, I just want to tag on Lise, and it's not that I want to give Alan Hardcastle yet another kudos, but the framework that he puts together and the process that he uses to develop these skill standards does just that. Goes out into industry, multiple sources, brings in the people who are doing the work, and goes through a process to extract out of them exactly what it is they do.
Okay, well,
Yeah, so don't go to the HR manager, don't go to the CEO, they don't know. It's the people who are doing the work.
well, we're finding, I guess, that we need to talk to all of those people, and that's part of the challenge we have.